Okay, good morning all. Welcome to the licensing meeting 10th of March. We've got an additional report for the agenda, and the licence street trading consent owner is present today, so she would like to say a few words. So we'll take that report first if you're all in agreement, because obviously she's trading and would like to get back to Abergavenny. Are you all happy with that? Yes, yeah. Yeah. Should we take apologies of absence while she's coming in?
We've received apologies of absence from Councillor Hickman, Councillor Howarth, Councillor Prosser and Councillor Webb.
Okay. Any declarations of interest? Okay. And we'll introduce each other when Mrs. Bevan comes in. Are you okay there? Good morning, Mrs. Bevan. Yes, okay. All right, we've just the formalities of opening the meeting. It is live streamed, and we'll introduce ourselves as we go along, and we're going to take your application. You change the application first, okay? I'm County Councillor Linda Guppy, and I'm Chairman of the Licensing Regulator Committee.
Brian Strong, I'm Vice Chairman of the committee.
Nicola Perry, Democratic Services Officer.
Johan Gailey, Solicitor.
I'm Graham Perry, I'm Public Protection Manager.
Linda O'Gorman, Principal Licensing Officer.
Hugh Owen, Principal Environmental Health Officer.
Francis Taylor, Local Councillor for Mega.
Pauline Watts, County Councillor for Caldicot Castle.
Ralph Chapman, County Councillor for Mardy Abergavenny.
County Councillor Ruth Edwards for Lentilio Cresceni Ward.
As I said, my name is Fiona Bevan. I own a small business in Abergavenny in Kibby Walk Shopping Precinct. I've been there for 9 years, established a really nice little ongoing concern. It's open air, but it's self-contained, and I'm just here today to see what your thoughts are of my licensing.
Okay, we'll go through the report, and then the officer will present it, and then if there's any questions and everything, and if you want to add anything afterwards.
Sure.
Okay, it's an interesting one this morning, members. The Miserable Cow has a street trading licence, and the current policy that Monmouthshire County Council has for street trading is that it doesn't allow the sale of alcohol. Now, Mrs. Bevan has applied for a Licensing Act licence for the sale of alcohol, and it's what this has done is highlighted an issue really where there's a slight contradiction between the regulations under the Licensing Act and our own street trading policy. And I think that what we've chosen to do today is to bring this particular case to you because it's the first time that this has happened. But also there's a potential for some wider implications. So we thought it was particularly useful to give you the photographs that you've got in front of you. Hopefully you've all got sight of a photograph to give you a bit of a feel for what it is that we're talking about, and really bring to you a number of options, which is to either can stick with the policy that we have and to enforce the ban on the sale of alcohol and the street trading licence, to allow the sale of alcohol under the street trading licence, or to allow the sale of alcohol subject to specific limitations on its sale. I think that we need to be mindful, though, and Linda's going to go through the detail of this in terms of the legal implications, that there are potentials depending for some contradiction with the Licensing Act if we choose to exclude or limit the sale of alcohol. The Licensing Act does offer the authority the opportunity to impose certain conditions on the sale of alcohol, which it already does. And I think that we need to be mindful that if we do pose limitations under street trading, it may cast some challenge to the Licensing Act licence. So I'm going to let Linda go through that in a little bit more detail, and then I'll hand back to the chair.
Yes, thank you for that. Basically, I'll go over the points, which, after looking at the Licensing Act, there's a number of issues that it conflicts with both acts. If I can try and explain it, under the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1982, which deals with street trading consents, we are able to make conditions and put any policies in place, which we quite rightly did with regards to street trading when we introduced the block street trading and day traders. Under the Licensing Act 2003, it deals with alcohol sales. Now, the report that's been presented today, as looked at, is dealing with the street trading consent issue, and is giving you in 2.1 the options you can take under the street trading consent. Unfortunately, though, if you was minded to take the exclude the sale of alcohol, there would be a direct contradiction, really, with the Licensing Act 2003. In that, the only way you can actually get rid of a licence under the Licensing Act 2003 is either you revoke the licence or the applicant surrenders it. To revoke a licence, you have to review that premises, and it has to be brought before committee. There is no issues with this venue, in that we've had no problems at all under the Licensing Act, so you'd have no grounds actually to review the premises. So basically what you would be saying is, if you excluded under the street trading consent that you wouldn't allow alcohol to be sold under the street trading consent, you are effectively allowing the person to hold a licence under the Licensing Act which they could no longer use. So it would be unreasonable, and it would be regarded as Wednesbury unreasonable, in that you would allow a person to pay for a licence under the Licensing Act, and then she can't use it. So you could be open to challenge, really, under that, under the Licensing Act itself. And we could be sort of liable to judicial review because it is unreasonable to allow a person to hold a licence they can't theoretically use. So that's the point of law that I wanted to bring up. In hindsight, when we actually did the policy under street trading consent, yes, it was a good idea to actually put alcohol in it, because we didn't want any sort of unscrupulous sales when we're dealing with sort of stands and sort of stalls, basically. However, there are powers under the Licensing Act which can deal with licences and alcohol sales in a much wider remit, really, and that's what the Act was intended under the Licensing Act. With that in mind, in this particular instance, when Fiona actually applied for a licence under the Licensing Act, it went round all the responsible authorities, so that's the police, fire, licensing, social services, public health. All those people are in the remit. And what can happen there is those people can make recommendations to put a condition on the licence. And what was done was the police came back and said, yes, I'm happy with this licence to go ahead, but we want, because consumption is not a licensable activity, so it doesn't need any form of licence for it, but we would, in the interest of safety, that we make sure that the consumption is only done in the area itself, which is in that coffee bar. And Fiona agreed to this and put it on the licence. There was no need for it to come to committee. The licence was duly processed, which we have to legally do. So the licence was granted with those conditions, and the conditions that are under the Licensing Act itself are on this report. And like I said, it's been highlighted today where the conflict is, basically, under the two bits. We've got a policy which says we wouldn't allow alcohol, but then we've got to process it under the Licensing Act itself. So I know this is not, we haven't brought the policy back here today, but it's something to bear in mind whether that should be taken completely out of the policy under street trading consent and it be dealt with under the Licensing Act in its right to avoid this happening again where someone's brought here because it conflicts with either one. So that's the base of the report. What I will say with regards to the venue itself, it is restricted to on sale. So what that means is they cannot take any alcohol from that venue at all, sell it. So even if they had liqueur coffees, they couldn't allow the liqueur coffees to be taken from the venue. It has to be consumed there and then. It is only open till 6 o'clock as well with regards to the Licensing Act sales, so it doesn't conflict with any others in the area. And you couldn't take into account under the Licensing Act anyway of competition. You can only take into account public safety, crime and disorder, protection of children from harm and public nuisance. So you couldn't take into account if there's anything in the area, unlike we have policies in place for our street trade and consent. So, and the applicant herself has been trading in that area for a good number of years as well, and there's been no issues with the alcohol sales. She had it just prior to November, and she's gone over the Christmas period, which is the busiest period where people go out shopping, and there's been no issues at all whatsoever with that venue. So there's a number of things really why we bring it today, and I wanted to sort of highlight that point. Yes, you have got the powers in 2.1 under street trading consent, but you are conflicting with the Licensing Act if you exclude alcohol sales at that venue, and it's something we should perhaps look at our policy with regards to alcohol sales and deal with it under the Licensing Act only. Okay.
Mrs. Bevan, do you want to add to say about your business at all before we invite any further questions? Your questions?
Okay, I'll just give you an overview of my business. Maybe some of you have seen it. We're based in a privately owned shopping precinct, and my actual business is contained. I have glass screens around it. Yes, it's classed as an open air, but we have the canopies. So at the end of the night, we're securely locked down the unit that my coffee bar is, and plus the whole of the precinct is gated and locked. It has extensive CCTV 24 hours. My staff are fully aware that if we do sell alcohol, that each customer has to realise that they have to drink it on the premises. And we have a board that's hanging up there saying only consumed on the premises. It's not my main business. The reason I decided to do it is that in 2013, I had a delicatessen that I opened opposite, which I got my licence for. Unfortunately for me, it didn't succeed, but I still had my other business, which is the coffee bar. So last year, I thought to myself, why aren't I utilising the course that I went on to gain that licence and bring it to the coffee bar? Now, the coffee bar is very popular in the summertime because obviously Abergavenny is so well known to be for the tourists. And what I've found is that a lot of customers, especially our foreigners that come to visit, they'd literally come up to the coffee bar and say, oh, do you have a beer? Do you have a glass of wine? Because I think it's just so common in European countries that happens. And I thought to myself, shall I do this? Why not? Hence why I contacted the licence department, went through a whole process, and was able and granted to serve alcohol. But what I wanted to do, I didn't want it to be my main point. My main business is food and coffee. That's what keeps me off the ground. But I also know that I have to diversify. I have to improve my small little business on this competitive market. And it hasn't made a massive difference, but it's just that little addition. So consequently, what I want to be able to do as the summer comes, and as you can probably see from the photographs, I don't have a huge capacity to stock a lot of alcohol. But I am passionate about supporting other businesses within the Monmouthshire area. And as I did in the delicatessen, I always used other local businesses. So what I want to try and do is just introduce a local beer or a wine so that when people can sit down and have a bite to eat, they can have a little drink with it as well. But as I say, it's only within inside that glass area in the precinct.
Thank you. Take your mic off. Councillor Chapman, you've got a question?
Not really a question, Madam Chairman. I know this facility well, living in Abergavenny. I pass it several times a week. I have to admit I've never used the facility, but I would support this report to include the sale of alcohol because I know it will be very well run. I've never seen a problem there, and I think, as the lady said, for tourism, I think it's a real good thing. So I would support A on this application. Thank you.
Councillor Higginson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. But I mean, I'm looking at the recommendations, and it would seem to me that C would be the one that we could, if we incline to offer a license for particular premises in relation to this, then that would be the element of the recommendations that we could agree on, I suppose. But I just want, and I mean, I know the area. I haven't been down there for a while, but I know the area fairly well. But the comment I want to make is, if you go abroad, and I've been abroad a few times, it's commonplace abroad. And the other thing I want to say is this: believe it or not, I wasn't aware it was gated, and when it's closed up, lock, stock and barrel, if you like, at 6 o'clock or whatever time it is in the night. But I think that for me makes a difference in that it's not open all the time. So it's going to be within acceptable hours if we agreed with that. That's the comment I want to make.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. I wish you well in your business. It's obviously well established and quite well supported in the area. And it's good to see somebody thinking of promoting things that are produced in the local area. Linda explained it very well, all about our policy, and I think that's for another day where we will, look at all that type of thing. But this is, do you still have to make sure that nobody under the age of 16 buys any alcohol, just like you would in a pub or anything? If all that's taken into consideration, I would support it and also agree with the other members' comments. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment on there? There's a condition on the licence under the Licensing Act that they comply with Challenge 21 policy as well, which you have to adhere to under the Licensing Act.
Mr. Bevan, just got a few questions. Obviously, will you be engaging your staff in further training to sell alcohol? And also, have you discussed with any of the officers in how you're going to serve that alcohol in view of the containers?
My coffee bar, we don't use glass. It's all plastic cups or paper cups. So there's a safety element there. Obviously, I have trained the staff, and that every customer that comes up, as I said previously, they must sit down and drink it there within the confines of the coffee bar. The Challenge 21, our coffee bar, actually, we seem to have more people that are 25 plus that come in. It seems to be that popular one. But obviously, families come in with their children, and we will be very closely monitoring it. And if you did visit, you can see it's not huge, and we're able to view every customer that's sat down there. So we're able to keep a good close eye on everybody who visits the coffee bar.
What containers will you... I'm not quite sure how you get over the problem of if you're serving maybe bottles of beer or lager, or even you can get small bottles of wine. How do we get over that in view of... maybe the officers can come in and help. In other establishments, they use polycarbonate glasses, but I'm not quite sure if there's a conflict if you're
Can I just clarify on that? It's not a condition under the Licensing Act that they have to decant into polycarbonate. It does tend to be the more busier premises have that condition on their licenses, where you've got vertical establishments with music and alcohol sort of free flowing and people dancing and moving around. So this is slightly different in that is more of a restaurant type atmosphere. So it's unlikely, that condition wasn't actually put forward by the responsible authorities when it went out for consultation. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Lou.
Yes, it's not a question. It's really just to confirm what Ralph Chapman said. I think that the licence should be granted. Already there are restrictions on it time-wise, and you do at the moment serve liqueurs, I think. So, I think it's obviously a well-run establishment, and I'd be in favour of granting the licence.
Have you got any further comments?
No, there's no further comments. Obviously, the report sort of highlights how long sort of the business has been run and the type of licences that conflict. So.
Yeah.
My only point would be that in terms of the recommendations, that there are three options, and if members were minded to go for an option that to include the sale of alcohol subject to limitations, then you need to have a discussion about that. And I think having Mrs. Bevan here gives you an opportunity to have some dialogue with her about what may or may not work for her. So I just ask members to consider whether they're minded to approve the sale of alcohol or subject to limitations.
Councillor Watts?
Thank you. Yes, I have every confidence in Mrs. Bevan, the way she's talking about it and answering all the questions that we've been asked. She will be running a very tight and good business there.
Thank you, Chairman. I would move A, Madam Chairman. The limitations are already there without putting C on. I think I would move A, Madam Chairman.
Okay. Councillor Higginson, and then...
Yes, Madam Chairman. I fully agree. It's subject to recommendations 2.1c, and that's the one is subject to limitations. You can close 6 o'clock in the night, that sort of stuff, and it can be suitable container. Receptacles, I think the word isn't it, the posh word, but suitable receptacles for the alcohol to go in, so I don't have a problem with it.
Can I just clarify, if you did, obviously you mentioned going for C there, but the actual conditions are in place under the Licensing Act anyway, okay?
Dave, and
just
then...
for clarification, while we're discussing this now as members, shouldn't the lady leave the room?
No, it's not. It's not an application for a street change, and it's just a change of conditions to it, and we don't have to. I think with trading and consent, they don't have to leave the room anyway, do they?
That's correct, because it's not granting the consent in this instance. It's actually making a change to the policy under the street trade and consent itself to allow the alcohol to continue at the venue.
Councillor Taylor, thank you for that.
Yes, can I second Councillor Chapman's proposal for recommendation 2.1a, because there are clearly already conditions included in the licensing consent. And in terms of issues with receptacles, I mean, we can see in the picture there are already, it's just the same as selling a small bottle of ginger beer, which comes in a glass bottle. But it's a small establishment, I know it well, and I cannot see that there are any reasons to impose limitations or any further conditions at this point in time, given what we've heard. But clearly there's always an opportunity, if there are any issues with the premise, to review it.
Thank you. I've got two proposals off the floor here for A, include the sale of alcohol, and Councillor Higginson have said that he recommends C, that's the sale of alcohol subject to limitations.
Could I say, Madam Chairman, I withdraw that in consequence of what the officer outlined in the policy.
Okay, thank you. Just to complete the first circle, are there any other recommendations that are coming off the floor today? From what I hear, it's all very positive. Okay, so we'll go to the room. If everybody's finished with asking questions, or if there's any further comments, no further comments to be made, then can we vote on the recommendations 2.1? Members agree to conditions attached to the continuation of the street trade and consent STR 004, the MC Coffee Bar Limited, that's Miserable Cow Limited, Open Air Precinct, Sibiway, Abergavenny, to include the sale of alcohol, which is recommendation A. Thank you. Can I also add with that that this committee needs to look at the street trading consent, and that be brought back to the committee at a later date and not to be discussed here. Can I make that also adding in with a recommendation? Yeah. A pension. Yeah, okay. If that can be added within the recommendation as well. Thank you, Mrs. Bevan. Okay, and we wish you well. And yeah, okay. Thank you very much. We move back to the agenda now. Item 3, to confirm accuracy of minutes for the licensing committee held on the 20th of January.
Madam Chairman, with the exception, I was present, but it's not included in there. With that exception, I move the minutes.
Yeah.
The minutes be meant to record the fact I was there.
Yeah.
But I
Thank
prepared to move the exception.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. The officer did inform me that it had been admitted, and an apology for that. So with the addition of Councillor Higginson being present, please, we have a seconder for that, please? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item number 4, annual licensing fee in financial year 2015 and 16.
May I ask why these have been brought before us, 4 and 5? These are already been agreed.
They were agreed on an annual basis. They were always bought. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, they are agreed on an annual basis, Councillor. Basically, we're in a difficult position these days in that the authority has to try and recover as much of its costs as it can. I mean, that's the sort of resource environment in which we're working in. But at the same time, legally, there's a restriction that we can only recover our costs, and the authority can't make a profit from things like licence fees. So each year, Linda does quite a bit of hard work to go over the amount of work that we've put into each type of licence, and to calculate what the true costs on our authority are of administering each of these licensing regimes. And that sometimes involves reflecting on what we've learnt about that work. And sometimes, particularly with new licences, we have to make a bit of a guesstimate as to the amount of work that might involve over the coming year. And then after a year, we've got the benefit of that experience, and we review some things. So in the fee schedule before you today, there are a couple of licences where, from our experience, we found that they've not been the amount of work that we might have thought that they were going to be, and we've been able to reduce the costs of those. Others have been a little bit more work, or we found that costs have been a bit higher than we'd anticipated. And of course, salaries have gone up. I think it's 2.2% this year, so there are some of the costs, but we've reduced costs in other areas. So each year we review them, and we have a responsibility to try and get them right and have an evidence base for that. So before you today are a proposed schedule of fees for the coming year, based on quite a lot of hard work calculating what they ought to be. They're at a level that would recover our costs without making any profit. So that we're doing the best we can in the resource environment, but within the requirements of the law.
Any questions? Councillor Higginson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I'm looking at them, and there are some favourable amendments, if they are amendments, I put it that way, in relation, particularly like driver licences, taxis and that. 1 year is £142. If it's 3 years, it's 224. So there's a benefit in that the vehicle drivers. So for me personally, I'm just making that comment. But I think, you know, we go through this annually as you outlined earlier on, and I think we can accept them, Madam Chairman. Some things need to increase, and the officer said, you know, you can look at others, you can review some of the others, but I'm prepared to move that we accept these as they are on block.
So any other questions?
Yes, Madam Chair. I got to disagree with Councillor Dickinson. Street trading consent. D. Linda is aware of this conversation I had with her. £41. We feel that if you're putting events on, that's a stab in the back. It's just, you're not going to get people turning up to pay that money for the day. They've got to sell a lot of burgers, hot dogs, whatever, to make it before they can start making a profit. I'm not saying there shouldn't be a fee, but I don't think the fee should be as high as that.
Can I just make the point in response to Councillor Evans that that's one of the reasons that we proposed the block consents that, for example, Chepstow have taken up recently, that allows a block trading consent for that area, so that substantially reduces the cost for individual stalls. So that potential is there for, if you like, non-profit making groups, is the proposition that members accepted. But in terms of the true cost of administering that day consent, I'll ask Linda to give you a little bit more of a feel for that.
Yeah, the actual...
Linda, could you also include with that some of the activities that people can do that would not require that consent as well? I think that may help.
Yeah, and with the day consent, we took the viewpoint, we tried to do it as cost effective as we could with officer time with regards to dealing with the day consent. As Graham quite rightly said, we're understanding that when you have sort of fates or anything like that, it could be onerous on individuals, really, with regards to sort of one person sort of setting up. That's why we introduced the block consent for that type of event. This predominantly deals with people who has the one-off sort of stall in that venue. So if there's more than one, you can go for the block, basically. That is the lowest amount that we could get it to without having to do inspections, and so just doing the administration type process inside of it in order to issue a consent. And the officer time and various other things, other factors are taken into account. There are elements under the street trading legislation where you don't have to hold a consent. And a lot of advice I give to people is, if you charge an entrance fee into a venue, you don't need a consent. The law actually states that in order for consent to be granted, the public must have access without payment, basically. So be it on private land or not private land, they can actually, as long as they can enter it, they can actually, and there's a store there, they must hold a street trading consent. That's the law itself. So we try to look at a way that we could actually deal with that. Rather than say you can't have one at all, we try to look at a fast, quick way of dealing with individual consent holders if they require one. So we try to give advice, either say, do it as an amalgamation of a few, so it'd be cheaper for yourself and go for a block, or try and do an entrance fee, so you wouldn't have to have any consent at all, because that's part of the law itself. So we try to sort of give that advice to people, but these are for the people who may want to go there for the odd day. And we were restricting people before by not allowing it, because we say there's nothing in place, you know, you've got to have a consent, by doing a minimal fee as we possibly can. So that's why it was brought in. So I hope that helps a bit towards it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand, you know, the background of it, because I've had this conversation with you, Linda. But what I'm worried about is, and we're talking about food outlets, is that when we have these fates, you know, not just in Caldicot, anywhere in Sevenside, it could be Mega, Roghead, whatever, right? And you've got a burger van there, and straight away you're going to say, well, hang on, you've got to pay £41, or £43 is the recommendation now. You know, it's going to frighten them away. and at the end of the day, these events are going to start to crumble. Because, and it's like I did put an example to you, Linda, about the Scouts. You know, they come there to one of our fetes and they do Welsh cakes. Now, the same thing would occur to them, £41, right? Well, they're not going to come. You know, and I understand that if what we had to do on this event that happened down the castle a couple of weeks ago, we had to put a fence in around the burger van and put a charge on, put a charge to go in to buy a burger or a sausage roll or a drink or whatever. You know, that's not, they're thinking, should we come back next year? And you know they've been there for the last 4 or 5 years, you know, and the council, the authority gets money from that.
Again, because the only way I could foresee to sort of try and alleviate this problem is because the Monmouthshire Council county as a whole is a consent area, so that means anybody going in and trading has to have a consent, basically, unless you have payment going into the venue. The only other alternative that you could go around that would be actually sort of write in again within the policy of the council, where you will have anomalies to say, well, you wouldn't make a charge or you wouldn't deal with the consent for these particular issues. So that's the other option of it, but as it currently stands, because we haven't got that in any policy at all, that's why the fee is brought in, because they do require a consent regardless, and we've got to look at how we're going to issue that consent, unless, like I said, it's written in the policy itself.
Madam Chair, if I can come back, I understand what's been said. I'm quite happy with the rest of the recommendations, but I cannot accept that one. But could we have what Linda just said now? Could we have it put on the next licensing meeting that we discuss the recommendation which could be made?
Councillor Higginson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I stand by my proposal to we accept these. And I appreciate there is an increase, is £2. But the amount of money you pay for cups of tea, coffee, burgers, sandwiches, or whatever, they'll soon get that back. And I don't think £2 addition is an excessive amount, and that will put them off attending any event. Thank you.
It's a difficult balancing act, I think, members. We may well come back to you with a proposal around this. One of the things that we're currently considering is, you know, the conditions that we have around some of these consents. So take the situation in Chepstow that we brought back to you last year, trying to reduce the cost for people that attend, but still make sure that we've got the controls in place and that the conditions that you want in your area are being met by traders. So the block trading consent enables us to offer the organisers a block consent, and they can have however many stalls they want there then, and they can charge just a very modest sum to each of those stall holders to turn up. As long as those stallholders comply with the conditions that you've agreed for street trading, and they take the responsibility for that, which means that officers can take a very light touch. They don't need to go there because there's a confidence that the organisers are controlling the conditions at those stalls. One example would be there's a proposal, and this happens in some areas, for example, that any food business must meet a rating of 3 or above, be broadly compliant with the law. And I could see some sense in that. And you may say, well, if we're going to have people coming into our area selling food at events, yeah, we'd like to know and have some confidence that they're selling safe food. And maybe that will give some assurance. If we have an individual consent, we know who's going to be there, and our environmental health officers are alerted to that fact and say, hey, they've got a poor food safety record. Maybe we'll go along and have a look at them. With a block consent, we don't know who's going there. We rely on those conditions. If one of those conditions is you can only have someone who's rated at a 3 or above, we may say, well, that's a lighter touch. But at the same time, it poses some difficulties for people who may want to trade and actually haven't got a good rating. So there's always that balance about how much do you want to try and control the conditions that you impose, and how much do you want to allow the sort of freedom for things to evolve and develop and for people to trade without impediment. And I think that that's always a little bit of a challenge, especially as you say, you know, you can imagine that the burger guy that's coming in, we may want to control and earn a lot of money, and at the other end of the scale you've got the Boy Scouts who are not actually taking much. And you know, and sometimes when you create a condition, it doesn't seem very appropriate for everybody. So perhaps you know, irrespective of these fees today, maybe as you propose, Councillor Evans, there's a chance to come back and to consider the whole issue of consents and conditions, and have another thorough look at it, and see whether you're happy that you've got the balance in the right place.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I ask, it's a question. We hold, in Caldicot, we hold 3 events. So when you're saying block booking, we could pay for the 3 events one amount of proposed £122.
You could do an annual block consent, which is what similar to what Chepstow has done, in that they recognise they have a few areas. It's not just restricted to the high street. The other high street, they've got a number of areas around there, and they know they have markets, so which are not recognised markets, so they still need a consent, that come out several days throughout the year. So in order to cover themselves, they wouldn't have to keep applying for a day licence and to go through the rigmarole every time they have one. They do an annual block, so it means then you're not restricted. If you know you're going to be constantly trading in that one area throughout the year, it may be advisable to go down the route of an annual block consent, so you can have as many traders going in, and you haven't got no issue then, and you can govern who goes there and make a minimal charge if you want to. It's up to you as the consent holder how you sort of organise that area. You still have to comply with the conditions of the street trading consent that we issue, and you as an individual will have to make sure that that is carried out, whoever you have there. So that's one option that could be done. There is an option, because we didn't want restricted to say somebody's always got to have an annual one, because they may have a one-off event and they may not want to use it for a good number of years later, where they could do a day block. So that's where the 2 options we're in. So it's something you would need to consider really on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I still stand with what I proposed.
When we considered Chepstow, we considered conditions regarding to the annual block. Are the same conditions applied to the day block?
They will be subject to the same conditions.
So the designated person, yeah. Okay.
Can I just add, Madam Chair, when we put an event on, we obviously every event got to have a risk assessment and health and safety check, and we use Lawrence Dawkins. So, you know, we know that whatever he does or whatever he recommends, we know we got to follow it, because he don't let nothing go by.
Can I just clarify on that? I mean, a lot of that stuff is done through Event Safety Advisory Group. It is an advisory group. It's not the law, though, unfortunately. And there are other areas where you must comply and have the right licence in place or the consent in place. So we can assist in the Event Safety Advisory Group with risk assessments, as you correctly say, to make sure the event is managed well. But you would still need, under the letter of the law, basically a consent or a licence if it's required for what type of activity you conduct.
Yeah. No, there's one further question that I wanted to ask about the Hackney carriage and private hire. There's obviously a change in when the fees need to be applied for. 5 years and 3 years. Do we foresee that there will be a problem in view of this payment? Because I'm not quite sure if it's the individual or the business that pays for this, in which case if it's a 5-year, it's brought in this year, that's a substantial burden from the 1st of April on the businesses. Has it been prior discussed to the taxi service, and how can we assist this, and also whose responsibility is it to check the payments? Is it the department or the debt department?
If I can try and answer as best I can on this. There is new legislation that is proposed to come in April. It's not saying it's definitely going to be in April. However, under the current legislation, you can still do a 3-year licence for driver or a 5-year licence for operators. You can still have that option. But the proposal in April is that that must be the case. And what will happen then is if a person is brought to committee, you could do a lesser licence for individual circumstances. So that's what the proposal is really in April. We recognise it is a huge jump from, they would pay a couple of hundred, like say, especially for the operator being sort of 700 or so, what is recommended on there. It is assessed of how much workload is done each year. You will, with regards to the driver, we'll be doing a DVLA check every year, which has always been the case anyway. We'll have the DBS check, which is the old CRB check, every 3 years, which has always been the case. And similarly, the operator will have the 3-year for the DBS check as well, albeit a basic check rather than enhanced for the driver. There is a number of elements. So I've discussed this with Newport, who currently actually do this now, and they've been doing it for a number of years, is how they've actually done it. We can either give them an invoice, because the Act says you can't issue a licence unless the fee is in place. That's what the Act says itself. So the fee has to be there before the licence is granted. However, you could issue an invoice, and what they do then, similar to how we deal with scrap metal, street trading, sorry, they can then make arrangements with finance to pay on a monthly basis by direct debit. So you wouldn't have to pay that whole lump sum in one go if they do find it. It is their option. They can either pay it in one go, or they can sort of stagger it out over the year itself if they wanted to, by that means, by an invoice. And everybody's open to that option in any form of licence, really, if they have difficulty in payment. It is a lot of money, but if they look at it in the long term, actually they are making a bit of a saving, really, on that. So that's something we can be, and it may well be, come April, that we wouldn't have that option anyway, that we'd have to go down that route of 5 years and 3 years. So we thought it was best to bring it in now and get sort of the ball rolling anyway, because that's what other authorities are aiming to do as well, really. So we'll have a look at sort of payments. If there are people who have difficulty in payments, we would work with those people anyway.
Okay. It seems as though if that's brought in, and we need to progress it to be brought in, we're bringing in another department in view of time lapse of a default. How are we going to manage that? Because presumably, and it's a presumption actually, do people pay the one-off? Are they paying at one-off, or is there already existing people that actually are staggering their payments, because that's a choice, within the department, and a reasonable choice? But I'm just wondering what my concern is, that there's a default on their payment, in which case that would be a default on their licence. Would I be correct in saying that?
You would be correct in saying that. In that, if an invoice is raised, the money automatically goes into our account. They then pay against that invoice per month. If they default on that payment, it goes then to cost recovery, basically. Unlike the Licensing Act, which changed a number of years back, if they want an invoice, you could actually take the licence back. There's other elements. You have to look at the law, basically, to see, well, could we theoretically take the licence back if they don't? And this is probably one element of it, because the fact they have to have the fee in order to get the licence. If they're not paying the fee, the licence isn't valid, basically. There's one other thing which I failed to mention as well, with regards to the operators and the vehicles. There has to be a legal notice in the paper, so they will be consulted on anyway. We are taking the proposals that the law of changing anyway, and the proposals to change it in hindsight anyway, to the Taxi Association, but there will be a legal notice before fees can be granted under those elements anyway. But we will inform the taxi trade of the proposals if it's granted to days.
Okay, is there any other questions on the fees? And there is a request that day street trading is, we've got one person that has not accepted it, and we've got another person to accept that. So
Madam
it
Chairman,
can't.
I made a proposal.
Yeah.
And anything else out of that is an amendment.
Okay. If you've got a seconder for your proposal.
I'll second that.
Okay. Amendment to what has been recommended today.
I made a recommendation on street trading on D, saying that I think that should be brought back to this committee.
Okay.
Madam Chair, the rest of it I agree.
Okay. The amendment is then is that are you in agreement to all the other fees except for that fee, and that's to be brought back to a committee?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Can we have a seconder for that? You want to second that then? Okay. We need to. Francis, have you got a question?
Yes, sorry, I thought that we had agreed, Graham had suggested that we come back at some point and look at, but in particular, the day trading, and anyway, to make sure that we had the balance right between ensuring there was a degree of regulation and that we were ensuring safety, etc., and also that we had the balance right. I thought that was agreed anyway, and that Jim had proposed, and it was seconded by Councillor Strong, that we accept these fees at present, and then we come back at a later date and look at, in particular, some of those issues which particularly affect, I think, from Councillor Evans's point of view, community events. Is that right? So I think
yeah, but that's not what Councillor Evans was amending.
I agree with what Francis has just said. And so if Ralph is happy, I'll withdraw my amendment
with an addition.
With a condition.
With an addition.
It comes back.
With an addition recommendation.
That's right.
Yeah.
Are you happy with that?
Okay.
Right.
Are you happy with that? Yes. Okay then. We've got a seconder and a proposer for the recommendation in 2.1 and 2.2, with an additional recommendation that, in view of the just individual day street trading consent, is brought back to this committee and reviewed. Yeah, daily street trading. Yeah, and not the blocked street trading.
Madam Chair, street trading is different to events. Because if you have an event like in the Caldecott Castle, it's not like somebody can drive up or walk through. Right?
No, it's
a street trade, and I understand, and I would accept that, right? But on events, I think it's a bit different.
Okay. Right. Are we all clear with that then? Okay. We'll just take the vote then. Pardon? On the proposal with the addition to the recommendation. We'll be able to bring that back to the next. We'll be able to bring that back to the next committee, or. Yeah, yeah, and maybe with the addition of the amount of people applying and cost benefits. Yeah, for the full detailed report. What's not attached, but I've got some questions. What's not attached and what I've got some questions is regarding the fees, really. So, are you going to present, or Hugh? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Graham. I'll give a brief summary of a report, if I may. Try and keep it brief. As members are aware, a report was presented to LNR at the last meeting, and the proposed approach for discharging the Council's responsibilities under the Mobile Homes Wales Act 2013 was agreed. A report was subsequently presented to Council on the 26th of February, and the recommendations of that report were agreed. The recommendations included the adoption of a fees policy presented. So that was agreed by Council. And importantly, for the purpose of today's meeting, to delegate authority to LNR to agree standard conditions which may be attached to site licences. Number one. Number two, to agree a fit and proper person policy. Number three, to issue site licences and determine if a committee so wishes that routine applications with no significant issues may be issued by officers. In consequence of a report presented today, the report presented today provides recommendations for further agreement in line with those recommendations. Appendix 1 presents the standard conditions for the agreement of LNR to be adopted. These are the Model Standards 2008 for caravan sites in Wales, produced by Welsh Government. The Act requires local authorities to have regard to these model standards. It is proposed that these standards are adopted subject to the bullet points made under point 2.1 and 2.2 of Appendix 1. Firstly, at the discretion of authorised officers, variation of the standard conditions on the recommendation of either the Health and Safety Executive, Fire and Rescue Authority or Natural Resources Wales. In any other case, on the recommendations of officers and agreement of LNR. Finally, additional site conditions on the site-by-site basis at the discretion of LNR, which may be beyond the model standards. Appendix 2 presents the fit and proper person policy. This is essentially based on, again, on Welsh Government guidance, the fit and proper person test information sheet, which was included in the information distributed. Officers are to be guided by this in processing applications. Authorised officers should normally have sufficient information to decide a person's fitness based on the completed application. But as 3.3 of Appendix 2 provides, where the officer is not satisfied that sufficient information has been supplied, or the information raises relevant issues which require further consideration, the recommendation is for the matter to be deferred to LNR for decision on a fit and proper person test. The final recommendation, in line with the proposals of Appendix 1 and 2, is as provided in 2.3 of the main report. When no relevant issues to consider, having regard to site conditions and fit and proper person test, the authorised officer may issue site licences. This mirrors the current caravan site licence regime, where licences are issued in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of LNR. However, and importantly, the proposed approach enables applications to be brought to LNR for decision where there are issues concerning the fit and proper person test and or conditions as provided in the appendices. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Higginson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And we've already discussed this in the previous meeting, and it had to go to Council, obviously, and it's now come back to us. And there are no changes there, and I'm prepared to move that we accept this policy, the recommendations of this policy. We've got to have something to guide us, and I've gone right through it, and having been a caravan owner, not now I have to say, and seen some of the things that I question, if I put it that way, in different places. I think the what's contained within this is there's enough protection for caravan owners, and particularly mobile homes, residential. And I think that we can, as far as I'm concerned, I can accept and therefore recommend that we. I propose that we accept these recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair, I'll second that.
All right, I was going to second it.
There was just a few questions in view of procedure. It said that if there are some concerns regarding the licence holder to be brought back to committee, and they we've got the conditions here put down for MCC. But we need a procedure which is not brought in, which we haven't got here today, which we would just consider that we need to review of the hearing so that it can be standardised. And also, what it doesn't say in this report is the right to appeal. And also, it says that we can provide a licence for up to 5 years. How are we going to manage, a sort of a bit of a woolly statement up to 5 years? Do we not need to be a bit more direct in what we are going to do? Because how do we then justify giving a licence for 2 years or to 5 years in view of open to criticism and review?
Thank you, Chair. Regarding your final point, the Act provides that licences can be granted up to 5 years. Yeah. And I think it's a general consensus and practice and intention for all local authorities to give a site licence for 5 years. Bearing in mind that the licence application fees which were agreed in council are for licences of up to 5 years. So the proposal would be for any licences issued would be for a 5-year period.
Yes.
I think that, the intention here is really for this to run something like you do with taxi drivers, in that if it's an application for a licence and there are really no issues, that we don't anticipate that you want that brought to committee and that the licence would be approved by officers. If matters of concern come to light through the inquiries that we're asked to make, then we feel that any of those issues should be deferred back to you for consideration in the way that you do with taxi drivers. And that seems to be an approach that we've established well, works well, and everyone's comfortable with. And I think that there was a question really from you, Linda, I think about how that might work in terms of the process. Would we, I'm not too sure, would we have a hearing, I guess? I'm guessing if there's an issue about a fit and proper person issue, that we would have a hearing here. Would that be the expectation?
That's my understanding, as per taxi licences are currently run.
So we would run that in much the same way as you're familiar with. I mean, we've only got a very small number of these, and we don't anticipate any difficulties, do we?
No, one point I'll make with regards to the standard conditions, it's envisaged that when a licence is issued, it would be with the model standard conditions as recommended by Welsh Government. And any variations of those would only be on for recommendation of the Fire and Rescue Authority or the Health and Safety Executive. If, for whatever reason, officers considered that a new condition needed to be applied, then a recommendation would be to come back, or the recommendation is, in those circumstances, to come back to L&R for the agreement of this committee for any new condition to be applied. Much the same with a fit and proper person test. It's hoped and is envisaged that there won't be any significant issues. But if there are relevant issues as laid out in the Welsh Government guidance, again, those issues to be brought back to L&R as per the fit and proper person test for taxi licensing, etc., for decision.
Yeah, and I read the fit and proper person guidelines, and to me they're a bit woolly. And in view of if there's a problem, or people have not owned up to any incidents that we find out later, I just see that may be a problem, because although with the taxi licence, they are all tested under DBS. However, this policy is recommending that you don't do that as a standard. And so you're just relying, possibly, I presume the application is going to be the same as the application that I've reviewed in the past. And I just think that all this needs to be in place in view of what is the procedure, not to come unstuck at the time, and where we're gathering our evidence from. It just, it just says that you haven't, there's no fraud, there's no issues, complaints, you would get that, you would find that, but only if the complainant had informed you.
If I can just answer, I know, as you quite rightly say, with taxi drivers is a requirement we have to do a DBS check. We had a similar sort of thing with scrap metal dealers, in that we don't, they supply, a basic sort of check, basically. There are other elements. If there's any element of doubt when they come to who come to assess fit and proper, they can always do a section 115 with the police to gather more information if they have any element of doubt on a licence holder with regards to a fit and proper criteria. So even though they don't necessarily have to do the DBS check, there are other avenues if they got any concerns to get further information from the police.
Okay, does that need to be brought into the policy then, in view of being more open and transparent? And just the answer on appeal, are they entitled to appeal?
Regarding appeal, yes, they can appeal. So if a site licence is issued with conditions that the applicant is not happy with, they can appeal to a residential property tribunal. A residential property tribunal covers all aspects of housing legislation, living standards, etc. Much the same with fit and proper person test. So if an application is refused, and a committee obviously must have a cogent reasons for refusing the licence on the basis of fit and proper person test, again, they've got 28 days to appeal to a residential property tribunal. One final point regarding the guidance and the request, should we request a DBS check at the time of the application? As you quite rightly pointed out, the guidance is fairly clear to say that unless a local authority has good reason for asking a person, then generally they should not ask. Good reason maybe, for example, where the officer may feel that the applicant has been evasive or untruthful in how they've completed the application, where there may be a history of complaints or problems or of a site which we're aware of, where the local authority has reasonable grounds to believe that they have committed an offence, and as per listed in guidance, which would follow on from the sort of liaison perhaps with the police, which Linda has mentioned.
We've already got an application form. Are we making any changes to the application form? And whereas, like our other taxi licensing application forms, it says about truthfulness and the procedures, but also what's not in this report is about, unless I've missed it, about appealing. We haven't got that in our local policy. We need to add.
There's a model or a template application form issued by Welsh Government, which does ask for sort of questions which need to be taken into account regarding the fit and proper person test. So it would be different, I suspect, to the taxi and licensing. The appeal procedure is set in the Act. So it's in the Act of Parliament that under the Mobile Home Wales Act that if an application is refused or conditions are applied which an applicant's not happy with, then they've got a right to appeal within 28 days. So that hasn't been included in the policy because it's actually in the Act.
I think it needs to be put into the policy in view of, if you're reading the local policy, I know you've got the guidance, but not everybody will read the guidance, in view of procedure when you're applying, so that people know that if there's a problem, and it might promote you know, any misjudgment of honesty or clarification. That it might encourage people for further clarification in view of what they're actually signing, in view of procedures, really. And I'm not quite sure it says in our local policy that actually, you know, there will be a hearing. I'm not quite sure that we've mentioned the procedure. And I think that needs to be put in as well.
That's straightforward enough. I think we can amend the policy to clarify that the deferment to the L&R committee will probably take the form of a hearing. That's straightforward enough. I think it's, you know, one of the things that we've got to be mindful of is that each case has to be considered on its merits. And that makes policy rather difficult. And the guidance is woolly in itself. And I guess our policy is slightly woolly, but it's got to be slightly woolly because the law requires us to consider each one on its merits. So we can't take carte blanche decisions across the board, really. So there's got to be an element of guidance and the sort of criteria that you're going to take into account, but we can't be too black and white about it.
Okay, how can we proceed in view of what we're being asked for recommendations here today, in view of if it's been brought back to committee and procedure, in view of further, I suggest a further procedures policy is brought back.
Madam Chair, I think we got compliment officers who are professional in what they're doing. Right? And I think if there was a problem, I think they would obviously come back to this committee with their concerns. So, and it's like it's been said, it is woolly, but I think we've got to treat this on a flexible application. Each application we get, it's got to be done individual. So I feel that, you know, the officers we got, they're confident in what they're doing, and I think we have to go on the guidance of the officers.
Yes, Councillor Evans, I'm not debating that, but I'm thinking that if we are past this today, there's a problem tomorrow, in which case a case needs to come back to committee. We have not got in place at this present moment in time a procedure in view of giving a fair and individual hearing, in which case that could be challenged. And we will certainly, if we have not got that in place, in view of our procedures, in all other our procedures that we take place in other licensing hearing, that you can be called to court in view of the procedure and how it's carried out. So we need something in place that's visible, open, so that we are following the correct procedures in view of you know, for fairness of anything that we turn down. Really, it's, maybe you might be that in view of this is live, anybody can be watching this. Even if you agree it, we could be still open to challenge that we don't follow the right procedures. So they do need to be put in place so that it can be viewed in view of the policies and recommendations and guidelines. Yes, they are woolly. The officers are the expert, and I'm not so concerned about that. It's in view of completing the package of this policy and procedure and the process. Yeah.
I mean, we also got to recognise that this is a brand new piece of legislation, so this has not been tested in any way, shape or form yet. So there's always an element of learning until we get to some sort of consistent understanding as to what that might look like. In terms of procedure, there's a distinction between procedure and policy. I don't sense that there's any issue with members in terms of the policy. I think what Chair has highlighted is that we haven't got clarity about how we might process a hearing. But clearly, if we were to have a hearing, we would write to the applicant and we would explain to them the procedure that we were going to follow. The proposal is that we would follow a procedure as we do for taxi drivers, and that's well established. We would write to them, giving them clarity about how that would work, and in a hearing we would follow that same format, I guess, and we would, the Chair would have that procedure out in front, and that procedure would be to ensure that what you did was robust and couldn't be subject to unreasonable challenge. So, my proposal to you would be, if you're content with the policy, you can endorse that policy. We can proceed on that basis. But what we need to do is just clarify the procedures that we're going to follow, so that any information that we pass out to applicants is clear about how that works. It's clear about the appeal process that Chair mentioned. It's clear how we might proceed with the hearing if we needed to, and any other matters. But, that for me is about procedure rather than policy.
Madam Chair, can I just make this point? And I'm looking at the key issues, and it's 3.1. The Mobile Homes Wales Act 2013 came into force on the 1st of October last year. And the key aim of the Act is to better protect the rights of people living in residential homes all year round as a primary residence. And they're commonly referred to as park homes. And I think there's enough in there for me, and I made my comments earlier, but there's enough there's an act in force, and as a consequence of that, anything is subject to appeal, and and if there's an appeal, well, we the people will hear it. But I think there's enough in there for me, and I agree with Councillor Evans. He says the officers are professional enough in their approach in drawing up the recommendations, and I feel we can accept the recommendations. And I did in fact move that we accept them anyway earlier on. And if there's anything else in there that is subject to appeal, then someone's going to take it up. And I don't think there's any need for us to go into it any more than what we've already seen with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Higginson. Okay. We've got a proposal and a seconder for the recommendations in 2.2 and 2.1 to 2.3. Can we show a hand? Okay. All in favour then? Okay, thank you. Tuesday, the 21st of April, 10 o'clock for the next Licensing and Regulatory Committee. In addition to that, there's been some dates for training for April for right away. Sorry, yes, I wanted to say Village Green hearing. This I've discussed with Nicola, and there was a couple of dates that are jumping up, and the 9th of April. I think the first of the 9th.
3 dates.
Yeah, the 1st and the 9th of April, or the 9th of April, seems to be very popular. With the members here, shall we confirm that the 9th of April? I know Councillor Taylor, and I don't know who else has given that information to Nicola in view of if that's not feasible. But can I see a show of hands today in view of if the 9th of April is obviously not everybody's gone the most popular date.
I believe, sorry, Chair, that if you were there for the 9th of April, you needed to be there the previous week for training. Did I read that correctly?
No, the training date is the 9th of April. That's one of the 3 dates that have been offered. For the hearing, I think from what I can gather from the email that there's possibly a hearing on the 21st.
Did you read that right?
I provided 3 dates just to try and find out which was the best suitable for all committee members to come to. It's relating to an item that's being brought to the next committee on the 21st of April. So we appreciate it was going to clash with the Easter break, but we needed to try and get the training done before the next committee.
Yeah.
I have had quite a few replies, and the most popular seem to be the 1st and the 9th, preferably the 9th.
Can I just clarify? Is no licensing training on that day? Is it just purely rights of way?
Yeah.
So I don't need to come along, because the reason why I'm saying that is there may be a number of legislative changes in April, and I'd rather defer it until much later to do the training then. So it's just going to be rights of way that day.
I think the rights of way is quite a detailed training that we've had in the past. It's not a simple, it's not a simple procedure really in view of looking at the whole pack that we'll have. So, which normally accompanies these changes. Could I see a show of hands of what if we can go ahead with the 9th so that we can inform the countryside? Yeah. Pauline, are you available that day?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the 10th was originally, it was coming to this committee, and they had to cancel the training that was prior to this committee. So now they're trying to arrange a new date for it to go to the committee on the 21st. I believe that's the case.
Yeah, the email said about the original email was for the 10th or the 9th of March. And when we had the email with the 3 days that followed, I think it was the original email that caused it caused confusion in the dates that were being proposed. And that's how I read it.
Sorry, Chair, are we still live streaming?
Yes, yeah. Well, we're trying to agree to we're trying to agree a date, because if that can't be brought to, if we can't have the training, we need to be informing the department that that hearing can't happen on the 21st. Okay. Okay, can you stop it?